though the universe conspires. An Oxford Cottage inspired story vignette, written by Leenie Brown and narrated by Christopher, an authorized voice replica. Author's note: just like Percival the Frog, the first story that started this collection of vignettes, this is one of the stories that might have been written, this time by Darcy's father, in the book given to Darcy and Elizabeth in my novel, Oxford Cottage. George Darcy looked once again at his watch. Half an hour. He was half an hour late. He sighed in frustration. He had begun his preparations with ample time to be ready and arrive at Lady Matlock's 12th night ball, on time, if not early. He tucked his watch back in the pocket of his waistcoat and rubbed his temples. Everything had seemed to conspire against him. A pulled thread in his breeches had required a new pair to be found. A dribble of wine on his cravat meant a clean one had to be tied, and his dog stealing one of his shoes had led to 2 footmen going on a chase to retrieve it. They were small things that required very little time to fix, but when they were combined, they had caused him to be late, and he did so hate being late, especially when he knew that his friend would be waiting for him. As George sat in his carriage, he wished that the line of vehicles in front of his, waiting to deposit their passengers at the entrance to Matlock House, would suddenly disappear. However, they did not. No lady or gentleman in possession of their faculties and a desire to be among the best society town could offer would willingly give up their invitation to a fete put on by Lady Matlock. Her soirees were always a crush. If it were not for the fact that Lady Matlock's son was George's dearest friend, he would not be sitting in line waiting to be added to the numbers in attendance tonight. He preferred small gatherings or none at all. However, one could not meet the lady one's friend proclaimed was one's perfect match by staying at home. At least one could not if one's friend was Henry Fitzwilliam, Viscount Brantworth. Henry loved being part of a crowd almost as much as he enjoyed arranging a match, and George had to admit that the fellow was quite good at matching people. Finally, it was his turn to disembark in front of the house, and so the door opened and the steps were lowered. "It is about time you got here." Henry was leaning against one of the large columns that stood sentry on either side of the door to Matlock House. "I thought perhaps you had decided against meeting her." He scowled at his friend. "I gave you my word." "I would think you would have more faith in me than that," George replied flatly, as he straightened his sleeves. "And now that I'm here, can we please get on with this? After the frustrations of getting here, I have a devil of a headache forming. I know you are not fond of society, but I promise you that your effort will be rewarded, for she is not like the other Debs, and I'm not saying that just because she is my favourite sister." George blinked. "Your sister?" He handed his outerwear to a waiting footman. Henry nodded. "She's not like Catherine, is she?" George gave an involuntary shudder at the thought. Catherine, who had come out 2 years ago, had, upon learning of his wealth and estate, set her cap at him and had made his season nearly unbearable, because he had been forced to spend much of his time dodging her attacks. He had never known when she would creep up beside him and attach herself to his arm. Thankfully, she had found another gentleman, one with a title and a slightly larger bank account than George's, whom she had found even more attractive and had married him. Henry laughed as he and his friend began to ascend the stairs that would lead to the entrance to the ballroom. No, Anne is nothing like Catherine. They are complete opposites, which is why she is my favourite sister. I really do believe that you and she will get along quite well. I would think that you would have more faith in me than that." George breathed a sigh of relief. "I suppose I should, but Catherine—" Henry held up a hand. "Say no more. I know how terrifying my sister Catherine can be. Now." He rubbed his hands together, as if in anticipation of a most delightful treat. "Are you ready?" "I suppose I am. So lead on, my good man. My fate awaits." "Wait here. I will bring her to you, for she's surrounded by gentlemen as she always is." He left George near the top of the stairs and walked toward a group of gentlemen who were gathered around a young lady with pale golden hair and sparkling blue eyes. She was tall as ladies went. Indeed, she was as tall as most of the men in the group who surrounded her, and even taller than a few of them. Henry shot his friend a hopeful look before slipping in among the gentlemen and extracting his sister. "Thank God you came when you did, Henry. I was running out of insignificant topics of conversation." She wound her arm around his. "Why must men demand unintelligent wives? And must I continue giggling? It is quite an annoying sound." "No, you do not need to continue giggling, and I suggest you think of some significant topics of conversation, for I have found a gentleman who cannot abide giggling girls and shuns insignificant discourse. Is he very old and boring? Not at all. We attend school together, which makes him my age, which is not old, and since he's my very good friend, I have no better friend. How could he be boring? You know I cannot abide a dullard. He's just there. Henry nodded to where George stood watching them. Him? The tall, handsome fellow with the dark hair and eyes? Yes. My, how does one look so regal and yet gentle at the same time? I wish I knew. I've often longed to have his frame and carriage. Now close your mouth, sister mine, Henry whispered as they drew near to his friend. I'm sure Mother would find staring with a fish-like expression at any young gentleman to be insupportable, even one with as fine a bank account and as beautiful an estate as George Darcy will one day possess. Anne drew him to a stop. George Darcy, she hissed. He's the gentleman you arranged to have me meet. Is he not the gentleman that so ardently avoided Catherine? Henry nodded. One and the same. Will he not also wish to avoid me since I am her sister? You are her sister, but you are nothing like her, Anne. You're just the type of lady my friend prefers. He took 3 hurried steps forward, pulling his sister along with him and ending their conversation before she could mount any further protests. George, allow me to present my sister, Lady Anne Fitzwilliam. Anne, this is Mr. George Darcy of Pemberley in Derbyshire. George bowed and stumbled over his greeting before apologising for his late arrival. Finally, after some nudging by Henry, the two were standing up next to each other, preparing to dance. 6 months later, George once again grumbled as he looked at his watch. 10 minutes. He was 10 minutes late. He was certain that all who were waiting at the church would think he was not going to show. A bead of sweat trickled down the side of his face, and he tugged at his cravat. Again he'd run into small problems that had converged to cause his lateness. He jumped from his carriage as it slowly rolled to a stop in front of the church. Seeing Henry waiting for him, he held up a hand to silence whatever remark might be forthcoming from his friend. Just point me to the side door, extend my apologies to your father and Anne, and notify them that I am indeed here. He ran in the direction indicated, and burst into the side room at the front of the church, startling the parson who was pacing and wringing his hands. George's breath was just returning to normal when Henry entered the anteroom wearing a large grin. Did your dog truly try to run away with the ring? He did, and that is just one of the mishaps that slowed my arrival. Henry chuckled. Your father is regaling my father and sister with the tale of those mishaps. I do not know who is laughing the most. It may take a few moments for my sister to regain her composure, but we should probably be standing in our places when they open the doors. He nodded to the parson and motioned for him and George to precede him into the nave. It wasn't a long wait at the chancel step, and soon Anne was standing at George's side, placing her hand in his. I thought you had changed your mind and did not wish to marry me after all, Anne whispered. Never, my dear, never. He smiled and looked into her beautiful eyes. How fortunate he was to have a friend like Henry who had insisted upon George attending a 12th night ball to meet his perfect match. Amusement touched his smile as he thought of everything that had attempted to keep him both from that ball and this wedding, and leaning close to her, he whispered a vow as the parson was just beginning to read the marriage ceremony. Though all the forces of the universe conspire against me, my love, he said, nothing will ever dissuade me from being at your side. For it was at her side that he knew he had, and would, find his greatest fulfillment and joy. Thank you for listening to Though the Universe Conspires. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please help other readers find it by liking this video and sharing it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you'll always know when I upload another video. The 2023 copyright for Tales from Pemberley and other sweet story vignettes, in which Though the Universe Conspires can be found, is held by Leenie Brown, all rights reserved. The narrator for this story has been Christopher, an authorized voice replica made available by the voice actor through the Elevenlabs library.